don't need all that information. She had, hold on. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, hold on. So, Bruce Campbell, Bruce Campbell, God, Bruce, that'd be funny. Yeah, like all of a sudden becomes a detective. We're going to reverse that. All right, dates. Oh, dates. Hi, everybody. I am Chryssi Cat, and welcome to Chryssi Cat's Crime Corner. And today I'm going to discuss the case about Linda Jensen and her murder that happened in 1992. So, a little bit of background with Linda. Linda was born in Minneapolis, and she had 3 siblings and a very typical upbringing. Like, she had a really normal life, and later on she ended up getting married, and they moved out to Big Lake Township, which is, I live in Big Lake, so this is one of the reasons why I was super interested in this case, because it was local, and I didn't live at Big Lake at the time. I lived down the road, like in another town, so pretty close by. This is still nowadays considered an extremely safe community, and not a lot of crimes happen. Unfortunately, when they do, it's usually somebody you know, like a husband, your own child, a neighbor. It's usually the culprits end up being pretty close to home. And the case ends up being no different on that part. So Big Lake Township is kind of like right next to Big Lake. For some reason in Minnesota, we call any little area that hasn't been placed in a city like a township. My parents live at Bogus Brook, which is a really funny, sounding town. So, and they have like a population of 60. This is a quiet community. When she first married Charlie, he had a drinking problem. And unfortunately, it just ruined their marriage, because that's what, drinking and having an alcohol problem kind of kills marriages, and they end up getting divorced. So she moved out to California and ended up being in a relationship with another man, and his name, I think his last name was Beard. She did have the son with Beard, who was abusive. Then she moved on and she ended up getting married to John Silliman, who ended up adopting her son, Joey, whom she had with Beard. And then she says this relationship also became toxic, and she ended up separating them. And this is when she ended up moving back to Big Lake. And when she did, she rekindled her relationship with her first husband, Charlie. They end up having a daughter together. So she has her first son, whom the person right now who has custody of him is not Beard. It's actually her third and second husband, because I don't think she married Beard. He ended up adopting Joey, and since there's some issues between them, she doesn't allow custody, which is a huge issue for him, and he's pretty upset about it. And so from her point of view, though, she's happily gets remarried to Charlie, and they have their daughter, and everything is going fine until in 1992, when Charlie comes home, and he ended up leaving at work at like 6:15, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Then he went to work and everything was fine. But when he called home multiple times, he couldn't reach her. And this is before cell phones, so calling home and not getting a hold of someone isn't exactly problematic, but he actually did have like a gut feeling that something was wrong. So he ended up going home a little bit earlier. And when he did, he found his stepson at the kitchen table, just doing his homework, not worried about anything. But the problem is their daughter was still in her playpen. And then he noticed right away she was wearing the same clothing she had last night. Linda wasn't the type to like neglect her children like that. There was absolutely no reason why she wasn't being taken care of and crying. And that's when he went and he started checking for her throughout the house. And then he noticed that their bedroom door was shut, which I guess for them, that was not common. Normally it was open. So when he went in there, that's when he found Linda. And she was completely undressed and she was under a comforter. Um, and she had a knife sticking out of her. Like it was so deep, it pinned her to the floor. And of course, her husband immediately called the police. Sherburne County Police, they're the ones that came out here just because a lot of the police forces aren't exactly very big because it's a lot of small communities. We do rely on the Sherburne County police force. So they came out and immediately started, an investigation. And what they had found, because I ended up doing an autopsy, is that there was evidence that she had been also assaulted. And I think she had been stabbed over 20 times. And it was a very vicious and very personal crime. So when they started looking at suspects, for one, she didn't have any enemies. There was nobody that stood out that she was having arguments with or never got along with or threats. There was nobody on the radar that could possibly have done this crime. So of course, the first suspect is the husband. And he was totally cooperative with the police. He had a solid alibi. He was at work. There was witnesses that he was at work, and he even took a polygraph test. I know they're not the most reliable thing, but I mean, now we know that. Back then, we didn't. But it does show a lot of good faith that he was willing, to come in and take time to kind of do this and kind of show to the police, I'm not your guy. So the second person then they started looking at was John Solomon, who was guy number 3 that she was involved with, who has custody of her son that he has no visitation for. Well, he has custody because he's not biologically the dad. He adopted it. She has custody, if that makes sense. So she has custody, but he's hoping for visitation. He's been contacting her, and she's just like, no, you're very toxic. I don't want to deal with you. And there was a lot of, there was some friction there. The problem is John Solomon lives in California and has no car. And he also ended up having an alibi. At first, it couldn't have been corroborated for some reason, but later on it was. I'm not sure why that was in there. But I mean, was he supposed to walk to Minnesota? So he was then, crossed off. And I don't think her second husband, Beard, would care. I'm not sure I don't think he was even really checked into it because he was so not on they didn't even see him at all as a suspect. So they did have 2 eyewitnesses. The postal carrier had noticed a man leaving in a tan truck, and she said he had scratch marks on his fingers and she didn't recognize him. Then another neighbor said that they also saw somebody leaving in the same truck and they didn't know who he was. So now we have this stranger leaving and they didn't know anything. And then her son did, because of having a stroke at 6 weeks old, had some developmental issues, and he had some delays in language and stuff like that. So I don't think he would have been paying attention, or it probably would have been pretty hard for him to be any type of a witness, either seeing anything, because by the time he came home, his mom had been gone for a really long time, and I don't think he noticed anything when he walked in. So they figured out, though, that she had died between 8 and 10 in the morning. And they know how, but they didn't know who. And they checked out all the leads, and they did have a DNA sample, but it wasn't big enough. They couldn't do anything with it. They knew they ended up saving it because they thought, maybe one day, but at the time, with the current technology, it was useless, unfortunately. And then this case went cold. It went cold for 8 years, which to me is just, kind of crazy. They just could not figure out who murdered this poor woman in her home. They did think it was personal because, which I didn't add, there was no signs of breaking in. Whoever, did this walked in the front door. They did not steal anything. This was not a crime motivated by money or things. This was a very personal crime. I will state, just living in this area and living in cities adjacent to this community, it is still like during that time, it was very much you left your doors unlocked during the day. You locked them when the sun started setting, or like at like 9. People will have, even now in my neighborhood, people have their garage doors like wide open. It is a very insanely trusting community. Although we did have some robberies because people were going around running in people's open garages, grabbing stuff and fleeing. So it's maybe not the best idea to have your garage door wide open all the time. But I think that was the hardest part, because, I can maybe list off a handful of murders that's happened in this area. Linda's sister, though, she does not give up on this because she wants to know who murdered her sister. She calls up the police like every 2 weeks, asking them if they have a lead, like what's going on with this, why haven't you figured anything out? Is there anything new? So now we're into 1999, 7 years later. She finally calls in, and Bruce Anderson ends up reopening the case. He was now a sheriff, but he had originally, I think, one of the police officers who was helped initially investigate the murder. So he was pretty invested himself, and he really wanted to find a solution. So they ended up putting out a reward for $10,000 for any tips. So they end up getting one. So Linda went to a gym, and there was another man named Richard Christie. And he also went to the gym with her and basically said he really liked her. He thought she was really attractive and just kind of gave a little bit of stalkerish vibes, like kind of a little creepy. But the thing is, he also had an alibi, and they just were able to no, it's not him. You're just kind of weird. So they got another tip. And this person had heard a person with a conversation stating that they had an affair, and they also knew details about Linda's murder, which of course piqued their interest because who is this person? And the person ended up being Kent Jones. Now, from the outside, he looked like your normal average dude. He was married. He had 4 children. He was a Cub Scout troop leader. So to everyone on the outside, super nice guy, great neighbor, no issues. But what he was hiding is the fact he was hitting his wife. He was assaulting her. They have multiple police reports of them going out to their house because of domestic assault. On top of it, his wife went in to the ER for a stab wound, and she claimed while she was loading her dishwasher, she slipped and fell on the knife. And the police were like, no, we don't believe you. That is just your reasoning for how this happened. Your injury does not add up. Because of his name coming up, they end up asking him, bringing him and questioning him. And at first, he's like, oh yeah, I know Linda, because he was also neighbors with her too. I see her jogging by, and she came over and she talked to me about her son being in Cub Scouts. And there was, then he asked about the affair, and he got really angry with that, defensive. And he had all these red flags. They were talking to him and really, why are you so suspicious? You're so sus. And so they end up asking for a DNA sample. And he was like, hell no. I am not giving you a DNA sample, which, just makes you look more guilty. If you're innocent, you would not have an issue with it, right? I would not want to be a suspect of a crime. I would want to be eliminated off that list as soon as possible. So they end up doing a warrant and getting one. And ding, 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 he's a match. So then he's like, yeah, I'm a match because we're actually having an affair. Yeah, that's why, because we slept together the day before. And then the police are like, No, from the sample, there's absolutely no way that it was there for like 24 hours. Like that doesn't make any sense. So then, of course, he changed the story that they had slept together that day, and then he left, and that was it. But of course, they end up arresting him for the murder of Linda Jensen. And then when it went to trial, the jury, or somehow there was extra charges added for second degree murder and assault on there as well. And so Kent Jones wanted the other suspects brought in that could possibly have been feared, or what about this mysterious man in this tan truck? And the judge denied that. That information was not going to be presented to the jury, so they never found out about that. And of course, they went through the trial, and he was convicted of murder and got life. So he first did appeal, and he was like, I should have been able to bring in like two other suspects that it could be possibly them. And you know what I mean? Like, why, if the jury maybe saw that and realized, oh, there's possible other suspects, I wouldn't have been convicted. Yeah, he got convicted and was sentenced to life in prison and was sent to Stillwater Correctional Facility. So, and you would think that was the end of it, but it's not. He even went to the Minnesota Innocence Project and asked them with help, just because he felt like he's like, I'm innocent. I didn't do this crime. It's not me. We just had a relationship and I never murdered her. They dumped his project because they retested the DNA and it was his. And the thing is, they couldn't technically say that, they didn't say that he wasn't not guilty, but they couldn't exclude the possibility that it was another person. Does that make sense? Like, oh, there's enough technically because your DNA was there, it looks like you, but there's no other evidence that was another person present to make it seem like you can't be like, it wasn't me, it was this person, because there's no one else. Linda's, family is finally relieved to, have some justice and be like, this is a person. And it's really frustrating that he kept appealing it and denying it, and knowing he has a track history of violence already makes him like a massive suspect. She probably got on his radar because she was asking about the troops, which is just really, really sad. And it's just hurtful that her two kids have to be, have to grow up without their mom. And then I'm not sure what happened to her daughter. I'm pretty sure Charlie raised her, but her son actually ended up going back to Solomon, who had adopted him. And Charlie was just like, he just thought that was the best for him, which I kind of think is a little weird, but I don't know. So I guess the two siblings got separated, which is kind of a bummer to me. The twist in this is that Michael McKean had done the testing. He had worked for the police for like over 30 years. It was like 1985 to 2019. He had dealt with over 200 cases. So he was testing DNA. I believe probably did like hair samples and that whole thing. And for a variety of different cases, and a few of them for murder. People start questioning his results. And the thing is, he never was like audited. People, suss about him for years, and nobody checked. They were like, yeah, this is a little fishy. Like some things are not always adding up with him. And people just did not stop and say, like, we need to make sure things are being done correctly on his part. Instead, they kept letting it go until after all the way to 2019. So very recently, they realized he had been falsifying results. The problem was Michael McKean wanted to be very helpful to the police, and on cases that he wanted to make sure they got the person that they were like hoping it was, he was manipulating and faking evidence so that, you know, he would be proven, they would get their guy. And then he was helping them. So quite a few cases that he had dealt with, there was innocent people going to jail over it. And the one case that he also had worked on was a little Linda Jensen murder. So that meant his case needed to be reopened again for them to examine it. So I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to do a live update just to tell you guys how this all wraps up, because this story is not very well known, but there's so many different twists, and it would be kind of interesting to look at Michael McKean later on. I don't know if I ever will, but I might. And those other cases that were overturned because he helped send innocent people to, jail, which isn't cool. For Linda Jensen's family, they have to go through another whole ordeal with this case. And now they're questioning whether or not Kent Jones did it. Watch my quick live, because I will tell you how it comes to an end. Because did he do it? Or, did Michael McKean flub, and manipulate the tests to make him look guilty because the police really wanted to find their murderer. They wanted to end this case and finish it. And unfortunately, Michael McKean was very helpful, willing to help even if it meant lying. So that's all I have for now. Watch my live so then you can find out the end result. Bye.